today I'd like to talk about reported controversies with a tech startup called Neuralink, which ordinarily wouldn't be a big deal, but this company is owned by Elon Musk. So if you happen to be watching this on YouTube and you accidentally hit the scroll wheel on your mouse, you might run into a bunch of this in the comments. Just be ready. Neuralink was founded by Elon Musk and a handful of less important people back in 2016 with the goal of creating brain implants that would allow people to use their mind powers to interact with computers. There are a million potential end uses for something like this, and Musk seems to have at one point or another touted all of them. Playing video games by simply thinking, curing blindness or paralysis, telepathy, and a real-life save point that would allow you to back up your entire life and then just reload if you miss that critical jump the next time you're parkouring between skyscrapers. Neuralink is in the news this month because of a nonprofit called the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, PCRM. They have filed a lawsuit to obtain documents that relate back to Neuralink, alleging extremely serious ethical abuses in regards to animal trials involving monkeys. I won't go on too long about the specifics, but just so you know, I am going to talk about it, and it is pretty upsetting. So if you, unlike apparently Elon Musk, have an ounce of sympathy for animals, human or otherwise, you might just want to be aware of that. So along with my, weird nerds content warning for the comments, note that there's also an icky thing happening to animals warning for this video. But here's the thing. This isn't just a question of whether or not Neuralink or their researchers abused a few monkeys. Not that that's a small thing, but this entire to-do has also brought to the forefront an important argument about publicly funded universities and private corporations. But let's start with the animal abuse allegations. A few years ago, Neuralink had plans to build an animal testing facility in the heart of San Francisco, where they're based. After a bit of back and forth over permitting, they instead decided in 2017 to partner with the nearby University of California, Davis campus, which already boasted a huge primate testing lab, one of only 7 in the entire United States. Since then, they've given the university about $1.4 million, building a 6,000 square foot vivarium that opened in 2020. Enter the PCRM, a nonprofit that's been around since the 80s and is heavily linked to PETA. Yes, that's a big red flag because PETA has, throughout its history, done a lot of stupid anti-science bullshit. That said, PCRM hasn't really done anything quite as ridiculous as the things PETA does. They've campaigned against fast food being served in hospitals. They've pointed out that the Atkins diet is kind of stupid. And they've pushed back on certain animal testing labs. That last one has had them butting up against other scientists. A lot of animal testing is absolutely critical for developing new medical interventions for humans, but not all of it is. Animal models aren't perfectly analogous to humans, so researchers need to think carefully about whether it's actually worth subjecting animals to otherwise unnecessary torture when doing their research. I honestly think that groups like PCRM are an overall good. Are they right about everything? Probably not. But yes, we absolutely need people to push back on existing narratives and assumptions like, well, we have to test this on monkeys before we let humans have it. True about some things, not necessarily true about other things. A good example is the Impossible Burger. A few years ago, I made a video debunking the idea that vegans should boycott Impossible Foods because they performed animal testing. The testing was on rats, and it was required by the FDA because even though Impossible meat is based on soybeans, they use a very specific part of the soybean that the FDA hadn't previously approved for food. It's stupid. No one needed to kill 188 rats to know that this new veggie burger wouldn't make people explode. And of course, organizations like PETA ended up attacking Impossible Foods and not the FDA guidelines that forced their hand. The whole thing was incredibly wasteful. But when it comes to something like surgically implanting a Fitbit into your brain, yeah, I can certainly see why we might want to test that on non-human animals first. And animal testing in cases like this almost always means that the animal is going to suffer and die. Even if the actual intervention doesn't kill the animal, often researchers need to kill the animal afterwards to do a post-mortem exam to learn as much as possible about what the intervention is doing. It's awful. But in some cases, there really is no better way to push forward science, technology, and medicine. And brain-computer interfaces could be quite important for the future of humanity. There are many companies exploring them, and research on them goes all the way back to the 70s. There are real exciting applications that are not only within reach, but actively happening, like restoring some people's vision, reversing paralysis. A lot of people can compellingly argue that that's worth sacrificing non-human animals, even before we get to the distant future, maybe never going to happen stuff, like being able to upload your entire self into the Matrix or what have you. So Neuralink killed a few monkeys. What's the big deal? Well, while it may be inevitable that some or most or all animals will suffer in some way and then die in this type of research, humanity has set up some basic standards for how much these animals will suffer and whether it's really worth it to make them suffer. So a previously unknown intervention that could reverse paraplegia? Sure, that might be worth it. A billionaire's science fiction fantasy that he wants to sell to make more money? Maybe. So what PCRM is alleging isn't just that the monkeys died in these trials, but that they suffered in extreme ways. The documents they sued to get from UC Davis originally included reports of at least one monkey missing fingers and toes with no real explanation on how that might happen. And several monkeys died because the researchers used bioglue to adhere the chips to their brains, which promptly melted their neurons. Neuralink responded by saying, well, bioglue is an FDA-approved product, but it's explicitly not approved for use on nerve endings for exactly the reason that you just heard. It melts nerve endings. It's kind of like arguing that vodka is FDA-approved and then being shocked when butt chugging it lands you in the hospital. Like, there are certain uses you can and cannot use it for. So, did researchers at UC Davis unnecessarily abuse animals while performing research for Neuralink? Possibly. PCRM is now trying to get more documents from them to explain exactly what is going on. And that, dear viewer, is where we run into problem number 2, which can be summed up by capitalism. Last month, I told you about Sci-Hub, which wants scientific data to be freely accessible. I pointed out that even publicly funded research ends up behind paywalls that only benefit wealthy publishing companies at the expense of humanity's scientific progress. The pairing of UC Davis and Neuralink is a related problem. Why do we allow private industry to buy research from publicly funded universities? Research they then make private and profit off of. I also touched on this topic in my video about Bill Gates from last year. Billionaires don't exist because they're brilliant people who leveraged their genius. They exist because they take public knowledge and resources, privatize them, and then reap all of the profits. This is a perfect encapsulation of just that. UC Davis is a public university funded by our tax dollars. Neuralink swooped in and bought their researchers for a song. $1.4 million is a drop in the bucket. You know, in fact, it's 0.0006% of Elon Musk's net worth of $233.6 billion. The net worth of the median American family is $121,700. So if that median American family spends 0.006% 0.0006% of their net worth on something, that would be about 73 cents. Elon Musk bought a research lab for the same price that the average American might spend on like half a donut. Like what even costs less than $1 these days? I don't know. And for that relative 73 cents, Neuralink can block the American taxpayer from reading what's happening inside a university that they are paying for. When the website Gizmodo asked to see the contract they inked back in 2017, UC Davis sent them a heavily redacted document that didn't even show the length of time that the contract was for. The university's spokesperson argued that the redactions would help preserve Neuralink's trade secrets, which were being developed in a lab where California residents are paying to keep the lights on. And when PCRM requested documents regarding the treatment of animals in that lab, this publicly funded facility refused to release photos and videos they possessed, arguing that, quote, the records belong to Neuralink, a private company not subject to California's Public Records Act. UC Davis cannot shield a private company from public scrutiny, says Deborah Dubois Press Esquire, Associate General Counsel with the Physicians Committee. Photos and videos of animals housed and experimented on in a public institution are public records. Neuralink can't avail itself of public resources but evade public accountability. No matter how you feel about the necessity of animal experimentation, I hope that we can all agree that PCRM is making a really great point there. While investigating all of this, I found a great article over on The Atlantic from 2017 that explores the myriad problems that arise when private industry gets its claws into public research. And it even opens with the story of a UC Davis researcher, Jonathan Eisen, great Twitter follow, by the way, refusing to sign a corporation's 13-page non-disclosure agreement just to participate in an on-campus meet and greet. The Atlantic writer, Molly McCluskey, points out that after a year of research, she was unable to even say how much private money is poured into public university research programs because much of that funding is simply not disclosed. Only one university, the University of Michigan, maintains a public database of how its research is funded. I sent public records requests to more than a dozen public universities, many of them among the National Science Foundation's top 10 Tier 1 public research schools, for information on corporate-sponsored research. Only 4 of those requests yielded a full response. The rest netted documents with vital information redacted, were met with extended processing times of up to 6 months, required fees of several $100s or more, or, in some cases, were ignored or just flat out denied. McCluskey goes on to point out that if that private funding is deposited into the public university's foundation, the corporation can even deduct it from their taxes. So that 74 cents that Elon Musk spent on his research at UC Davis might have also reduced his already negligible tax burden. The co-founder of Retraction Watch told McCluskey, what tends to happen with industry-sponsored research is not fraud, it's not misconduct, it's nothing that would be retractable. It's that they pick questions and they pick studies and they pick study designs that are likely to give them the answer they want. And then they can take those answers, hide them from the general public as trade secrets, and use them to manufacture nifty new devices, which may or may not make the world a better place for the people who can afford them, unless and until the company in question that is producing them goes bankrupt. And yes, that is already happening. Just ask Barbara Campbell, a woman who went blind due to a genetic disease 4 years ago, but had her sight restored using a neural implant. Unfortunately for her, the company that made the implant, Second Sight, has just gone out of business, leaving her with a non-functional object in her face. So now she's back to being blind, but also she has a hunk of cybernetics in her head that can cause further medical complications unless and until it is quite painfully removed. Like, she can't even get an MRI. Oh, and Second Sight didn't bother to inform her or the other 350 customers that they were now quite literally in the dark. How do we prevent this from happening again? Well, for a start, we can try keeping publicly funded scientific knowledge public. If the medical interventions our tax dollars help develop are made freely available, then a new company or nonprofit can step in and restore these people's sight permanently. Making the research available from early on would also help with pesky issues like making sure the devices actually work the way they're supposed to, and not allowing a bunch of monkeys to chew their own fingers off from the stress of crazy glue melting their brains. It's a real win-win. For that reason, I'm fully on the side of PCRM here. The real goal isn't just proving whether or not UC Davis scientists are abusing animals unnecessarily. It's making sure that public researchers are held publicly accountable.